Hello everyone, my name's Beck. Welcome to session 2 of this series of 4 short workshops around wellbeing and how to stay well, maintain your wellbeing in a positive way during this strange, challenging COVID time that we find ourselves in. Welcome, particularly if this is your first session. So this is the second session out of the 4 that we will be having together in this space. So for those of you that may not have seen the first session or joined in with that, we'll do a very quick recap about what it was that we discussed and spoke about in that first session. But the time that we have together today, we're going to be talking about making meaning and finding purpose as, I guess, a way to support us to stay well during this particularly challenging, unusual and different time. So in the first session, we talked about stress. So what stress is, how stress looks, how stress shows itself, how stress can build up, how stress can kind of be disguised by other things in our lives, things that we may or may not be aware of that are stress or that show themselves as stress. And there was an invitation for people to think about how their stress shows up for them and what their current experience of stress is about, and also, I guess, to have a think about what things in particular are causing you stress at the moment, because it can feel like there's a lot of things to feel stressed or worried or anxious about. So there was an invitation and an opportunity in the last session to really kind of have an honest review and stock take about what it is that is currently causing you the most stress in your life, so that you can look at some of the strategies and approaches that you might want to utilize to combat or to try and combat some of that stress. Because there are some things that are quite particular to the situation that we're in at the moment, in terms of the things that we do for ourselves. Those self-care activities or routines or tasks might be a little bit harder for us to, I guess, access and do for ourselves during this time when we're locked away in our homes. You know, we're doing things like this online, over Facebook, YouTube, whereas normally we might perhaps prefer to be sitting in a room together and having the energy and the conversations. But here we are. During this time together, I've just got a quick recap there to start with about where we ended the last session, or the first session, rather, about how to stay well during COVID, and some of those kind of key messages around maintaining a healthy lifestyle. So things like making sure we're eating, sleeping, engaging in things that are valuable to us, staying informed. So staying informed is a very individual, a very personal thing. So finding a source of information that you trust and that you can find easily accessible and digestible, that makes sense to you, and being aware of how much information is useful for you and not useful for you. Staying positive, and we'll talk a little bit more throughout today's session. We'll talk a bit about that, and in coming sessions, sessions 3 and 4 as well. And then, I guess, just as importantly, about how to access support. And at the end of last session, I provided some numbers and some contact details for people that they can look to or reach out to access some support, and I'll put those numbers up again at the end of today's session. So thank you all for joining us. So today we're talking about finding meaning and purpose. So where do we find meaning and purpose? And why is it important for us to find meaning and purpose? When we're stressed, often it's easy for us to avoid doing the things that that we normally do, because often our minds can be full of so much stress, or they can be so full of that stress that often it doesn't leave time for our brains to kind of pause and think, oh, actually it would be good to do something that I find valuable and meaningful and fun right now. And also because when we're stressed, our brains don't necessarily operate or think in the same way that they normally would do. So it might be that we find decision making a bit harder when we're stressed or worried. We find having choices can sometimes be overwhelming when we are feeling a bit low in mood or a bit flat or worried, stressed, anxious. If we're having those ruminating thoughts, often they can be quite invasive and can be quite kind of overwhelming, but they can also overwhelm and fill up our headspace so much so that even thinking about, oh, what would I like to do today? What are those things that I like to do? Stress can have a great impact on all of those kind of processes around thinking and planning out the steps that you need to take in order to do those activities that you would normally do. And obviously during this time it is that bit harder to do those things that we normally would do, so there are extra levels of thought that are required in order to do things that you would normally just maybe, you know, get in a car and go off to an exercise group or catch up with a friend, you know, go for a walk and catch up with a friend for a coffee and connect with someone in that way. There's all those extra layers perhaps of worry or concern around going outside, knowing where people have been, who they've been in contact with, and that can also kind of take the edge off the fun and the enjoyment of those situations as well. So there's all those extra layers that are quite normal and reasonable to be experiencing and expecting to be experiencing at the moment. But that's not to say that we still can't find ways to include things that are valuable and meaningful and fun for us, because there are a lot of there's a lot going on in the world at the moment that can feel like there's nothing fun happening. So engaging with things that are meaningful and valuable and important to us is so paramount and so important at a time when we're feeling stressed, when we are under duress, when we're in a situation that is causing us discomfort. But it can also be the hardest time to actually think how to go about doing those things as well. And we'll go into this in future sessions, but as it says there on the screen, the second point about making a plan to do things regularly, not only will it make it more likely that you'll engage in those things by putting a plan around them, but it will also give you, hopefully it will kind of give you and build in that sense of things to look forward to, which is really important at a time like this. So maintaining those kind of things in the future and building that sense and promoting that sense of I guess hope and optimism and having things to look forward to. So, you know, every morning we've got some kind of meaning and purposeful activity to get up for and to kind of, you know, have the motivation to get showered and dressed for. And as I talked about in the previous session, everyone watching this will have very different social and personal situations. So it might be that some people are still working, some people might still have responsibilities around, you know, caring for others or activities that they're still able to be involved in at the moment. So, you know, I guess as with any of this information that is offered in any of these sessions, consider your own personal context. And these, you know, the information that I'm offering you in this in these sessions today and in future sessions are just suggestions, and they're just, I guess, places to start thinking about your own experience and your own context, so that, you know, you can take away what bits are relevant and appropriate and meaningful to you. So staying engaged, so that again, that's that sense of how we stay connected and engaged in things and people and activities that are meaningful to us. So we are much more likely to engage and continue to be engaged in something that is meaningful and important to us. And that might be things within the home. It might be things now that we're able to get out and about a bit more and see more people. There might be different ways that you're connecting with the things that are important to you. So the things that are important to us all are, I guess, those things that kind of get the heart singing a little bit, or, you know, things that we look forward to doing or that we do get a very clear sense of enjoyment from. And sometimes we can get very, I guess, wrapped up in the everyday of life that we don't often give pause for thought and think about, oh, have I done something that I really enjoyed today? Have I, had something in my world today that's really brought that sense of joy and delight? Or have I just been getting on with things and, kind of having a sense of, oh, well, that day was just another day. So it's really important for us all at any time, not just now, but to ensure that we have things in our life. So, and I'm saying things on purpose because often when we think about staying connected and engaged, often we think it's about being connected to people and engaged with maybe jobs or work, but it's about, maintaining a connection to something outside of ourselves and maintaining connection and engagement with something that does bring us something positive, something that is meaningful, something that is perhaps in line with our values. And for some people that might be things like the organisations that they choose to do volunteer work with, or conservation groups that they might do work with, or other charitable work that they might do. It might be the relationships, the friendships, the family connections that they have in their lives. It might be particular hobbies or activities that bring that sense of real kind of, that real level of engagement as a human being in a bigger picture world. It's really important to, particularly when we are in a time of great stress, which we all are at the moment. There's a lot around us that could cause us, could infiltrate and cause us to worry lots. It is important sometimes to be able to, I guess, pop that to the side and do something that takes us out of our own head a bit and out of our own thoughts. And people talk about, I'm not a runner, but people talk about when they're running that, it doesn't, there's no place for those worrisome thoughts or those kind of low mood thoughts when you're running, because you're just concentrating on doing what you're doing. So there are lots of physical and mental health benefits attached to engaging regularly with meaningful activities, people, tasks. And as I say, that can be in the home and outside of the home. And one of the clever ways, which again mentioned just before, but we'll also talk about in future sessions, is how we set ourselves up to ensure that we will maintain those connections and those engagements. So, making those activities part of your daily routine is going to help you succeed, I guess, or going to help you complete those daily activities and tasks in a much more consistent way. So that's around goal setting, which this isn't a session around goal setting, but in terms of how we promote a sense of engagement and connection with an activity is about how we bring it into our daily routine so that it feels like something that's easy to do. And things that are meaningful are going to be far easier for us to do. And if we've then been smart about planning them so that we're looking forward to them and doing them in a kind of structured and routine way, then they're much more likely to happen. Another thing that can be really helpful to us at a time like this, when we are maybe struggling to find positive things that are happening, when we are perhaps struggling with feelings of, or maybe feelings that we haven't experienced before or for a while. Some people might be feeling particularly disconnected or unsure about what control they have over their, their current situation and, what capacity you have to change things or influence your lives at the moment. So everyone's going to be sitting with different kind of worries or thoughts or concerns at the moment. But one thing that we do all have, which is a great tool that we can employ and utilize at this time, is thinking about what we have. And I guess sometimes this isn't a thing that we are naturally encouraged to think about, but it's a really good opportunity to think about when we're wanting to bring meaning and purpose into our lives, what are the things that I have in me that are going to, I guess, equip me, and things that I can use to engage in activities or maintain connections with people in a meaningful, valuable way. So one thing, a really good tool that we all have is are our strengths. And as I said, we're not generally encouraged to think much about our strengths, but our strengths when we're feeling particularly vulnerable or when we're in a situation that is bringing up a lot of our vulnerabilities. And when I say vulnerabilities, that might be things like feeling a bit anxious or a bit more concerned than usual or a bit more worried than usual. Our strengths are our innate, inbuilt tools that we can use to combat our vulnerabilities. So it's useful, I think, particularly at a time like this, to think about what your strengths are. And we talk about, in everyday language about playing to our strengths. And there's really good reasons as to why we use that phrase, because using our strengths is going to at any time support our well-being in the most effective way. If we have a very strong awareness of what our personal strengths are, then we're not, trying to put a round peg into a square hole. We are using what we naturally have in us and around us, because as you'll see when we go on to up the other slides in a moment, strengths aren't just things that are within us, but when we're utilising the strengths that are within us and around us, we are more likely to work towards our goal. We are more likely to find motivation to do things, to engage with the things that we want to connect with, that bring meaning and value into our lives. So it's useful for us all to think every now and then about what our strengths are, and often these are things that might be reflected to you by other people. Unless you're necessarily asked by a mental health professional like myself to think about what your strengths are, you might kind of think, scratching your head, I don't know what my strengths are. I don't know, what I'm good at or what I can do. And then thinking about what other people might say to you about what you're good at can often be a really good reference point. So if we're thinking about strengths, what do we actually mean? As I said at the beginning, any of this information is just suggestions. They're just, one set of thoughts that we might use or subscribe to at Nehemiah, but there's lots and lots of different, I guess, frameworks or models that you might refer to when you're thinking about areas like this. So the next couple of slides have just broken up strengths into 4 different areas. So strengths can be things like your personal qualities, and that might be things like your, your abilities. So things that you can do, things that you're good at, some of your behaviours, some of your character traits, and often people might refer to those more commonly rather than strengths. So those kind of innate personal traits that you have, or your personality, what type of personality, or whether it's a personality type, or whether you're known to be a bubbly personality or an outgoing personality. So your personal qualities form part of your strengths. Environmental strengths, and this is one that we don't often commonly think about. So that's when I was saying earlier about our strengths aren't just things that sit within us. There are strengths. If we think about strengths as being tools and resources, there are environmental strengths that we might have around us. And this is where people's personal and social situations will differ quite greatly. So if you're thinking about strengths as being things that support your well-being, who you live with, whether that's no one, whether that's one family member, no family members, whether it's friends or housemates, whether you have pets in the house or don't have pets in the house, and the actual physical building and environment that you live in, what that's like. Is it a place that you feel safe in? Is it a place that is weatherproof, waterproof, heated, comfortable? Your environment can also encompass things and include things like your local community. And that for some people can be a faith community, which is very important to them, and I guess a physical environment that they might go to. And I think people can now start accessing some faith-based services outside of the home rather than just remotely now. So, those things that are external to us that form part of a wider environment are things that we can reach to as strengths or access as strengths to support us to maintain a healthy sense of ourselves and our well-being. And the last two areas of strengths are thinking about our skills and talents, which is often what people think of when we talk about strengths, so that, you know, things that I'm good at. And some of these, you know, probably personal qualities would be more of those perhaps innate skills or strengths or abilities that we have, whereas skills and talents might be more things that we've learnt over time, and they could be things that we've learnt over time out of necessity or choice. And, you know, things that you have a sense of competency around, and things that you've perhaps practiced over a long time. And I think a good example of that might be things like meditation or mindfulness, because that is often a thing that people take a lot of years to practice and to build up skills around, and is something very strongly that people do use as a strength to support their well-being. And interests and aspirations are things that, you know, we have an interest in, and that do provide us with that motivation, and that I guess wish or desire to set goals for ourselves and promote and affect change for ourselves. So having things that we're interested in and things that we want to do, so that kind of future looking, so that is going to help us maintain engagement and connection for ourselves, all of which are going to help us to support our well-being. So where else do we find meaning? How do we know what meaning is? So we've talked about, excuse me, I've got such a terribly itchy nose. We've talked about, you know, being engaged with things that are meaningful and valuable and important to us. We've talked about having an awareness of our strengths, so that we know, I guess, what it is that we're working with, what we're, you know, what tools and resources we have within us that can support our well-being. So remembering that this is all about how we make choices and how we set intentions for ourselves around supporting our well-being and having that sense of meaning. And everyone will draw a sense of meaning from different areas, from different things, from different aspects of their lives. And this is just one model, I guess, that we use at Nimai to support people to think about where they might find meaning for themselves. And they are, there's 6 categories there that can mean quite different things to everyone that's looking at them. And as I said, these are just suggestions, but they can be useful to think about in terms of, if this was a pie or a cake and you were cutting up slices, if you were cutting that pie or cake into 6 slices, and each slice or piece of the cake or the pie was one of these areas of health. So we've got optimal health in the middle there, because that is at the center. That is what we're talking about here, is optimizing our health and our well-being and doing what we can to support it in its most optimal way. So if we were thinking about our own health, well-being, optimal health and well-being, pie or cake, and cutting up slices or pieces of that pie or cake, and each piece being one of those different areas of life, it's interesting to think about what size each of those pieces would be. So when we think about spiritual, that doesn't necessarily mean religious or religious faith or beliefs. That just means those kind of, I guess for everyone, and I'm just going to refer to my notes, because it's always, I find it a tricky one to explain, but spiritual, or the spiritual area or aspect of our health, can often refer to or include our values. So those kind of things that make us who we are and make us want to be a particular type of person. So that can come from and be driven by our values. It can come from a religious or non-religious faith base for some people. So it's those kind of core things inside of us that shape and form the type of person we are and want to be and strive to be. Our social aspect of health or area of life involves, quite obviously, I guess, but I shouldn't assume everything's obvious. But this can involve relationships with family, with friends, people in our community that we interact with. And that could be, you know, the person that we get our bread from every day, or the person at the newsagents where we get our daily newspaper from. It could be the hairdresser that we see every 6 weeks. So thinking about not just about what your social life is like or who you socialize with, but all the kind of interactions that you have, or the people that might be within your circle of connection. What size piece of pie would that have in your cake? Physical area of optimal health, that involves many aspects of our physical health, and that could be how people are navigating chronic physical health conditions. It could be how people are navigating new physical health conditions. It could be relating to the choices that we make around how we engage with our physical health. So do we go to all the appointments that we need to go to around our physical health? Are we satisfied with our physical health? Are there, you know, changes or shifts that we might want to make within our physical health area? Things like exercise or diet, they might come into physical health. Intellectual is about the, I guess, can include many things. It can include, you know, our thinking, how, I guess, the computer or the machine in our heads, our brains, operating, how that's all working. And some people will have different needs around their intellectual health and area of life. Some people will feel quite complete around that. Some people will feel, you know, some people have a greater need and want to learn and to keep learning as they go through life. So this can be a really kind of useful one sometimes to think about, you know, am I engaging with my intellectual part of myself? What am I, you know, how much time am I giving over to that? Am I feeding it and giving it what it needs right now? Again, how big a piece of the pie would it get? Occupational, that's not just about working, that's about any kind of a thing or task or activity that you're engaged with. So bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier around how we find meaning and purpose. We find meaning and purpose in the things that we are engaged in, the things that occupy us. And that can be things like activities that we do. It can be things, if anybody watching this is still working, it can be your actual, you know, role in your job or your career. It can be volunteer work. It can be your role as a carer. It can be your role as a particular person within a family structure. So occupational can often, I guess, involve a lot of stuff that we might draw our sense of identity from. It might be the roles, the different roles that we occupy in life. So that can be quite a significant part of people's lives, depending on what their own personal context and situation is. So that's a really important one to think about. How big a piece of pie does that take up in terms of, you know, how significant an area of my life is that, and also how kind of satisfied am I with that area of my life. And emotional, the last one there, is about recognizing and having an awareness of our feelings and our emotional health. And I guess emotional health can be interchanged with mental health as well. So the kind of thoughts, feelings, behaviors that we might be having, the responses that we might be having, and particularly at a time like this, some of those emotions that we might not have experienced or, you know, had surfaced for a while, because life has been kind of plodding along quite regularly, quite normally for a long time, and then this extraordinary thing of the COVID situation has come along, and it's giving us pause for thought, or it's giving us I guess forcing us almost to be creative about how we deal with some emotions that we might not have kind of seen come up in us for a while because we haven't been put under such an undue amount of stress for a while, depending on your personal situation. And within that emotional area of health, it can be important to think about what our capacity to regulate and manage our own feelings and thoughts and emotions or emotional responses might be. And that's a particularly relevant one at the moment too, I think, because we, as I said, we might be experiencing emotional responses that we're not that comfortable with because we haven't experienced them for a while, because we haven't been put under such stress or discomfort or into, you know, such areas of discomfort for such a long time that we don't necessarily know, oh gosh, what is this that's happening for me, and therefore how to respond to those emotional responses. So this can be a really useful tool to do a bit of a, I guess, a stock take or a review of different areas of what can be considered to promote optimal health. And I guess to loop it back to what we're talking about around finding meaning and purpose, I guess optimal health is about trying to maintain a balance of those, in this instance, of those areas of life. So are we putting too much energy or time into one area at the cost of, or to the detriment or to the cost of another area? Are we, if you went through those 6 different areas and rated your satisfaction in those areas, are you finding that you're getting a lot of meaning from one area but not a lot of meaning from another area? So it can be really useful as a tool to promote some thinking around and some reflection around, actually I'm not feeling that satisfied or fulfilled or like I'm getting a lot of meaning from that area of my life. So what do I want to do about it? Or do I want to do something about it? It might be something that you're happy to kind of just let sit as it is for the moment. So that's just as I say, a really good tool to think about where we find our meaning, and thinking about as well within those areas of optimal health, where our strengths fit within that. Do we employ, do we utilize different personal strengths within those different areas of life? Are there some areas of that optimal health diagram that we're perhaps not addressing, or we have concern or anxiety about addressing because we feel like we don't have particular strengths in that area, or we don't have the resources to look at one of those areas in our life? And thinking about, often at Neiman we talk about strengths and values going hand in hand, and I did mention that the top circle there, spiritual, that spiritual area of health can encompass some of our values. So thinking about, you know, who am I as a person? What is the type of person that I want to be? What is it that I connect with that kind of gives me that sense of, you know, people might sometimes use morals in when they're talking about values or spirituality or, you know, spiritual health. But it's just that sense of what informs the type of person that we are. And all of those aspects of health will inform the type of person that we are. But it's important to kind of look at where we're drawing our meaning from and where our values sit within that. And are we drawing meaning from the most appropriate things and things that are in line with our values? So meaning and purpose, to, I guess, bring this together. So we've talked about ensuring that we are doing things that are enjoyable and fun, because there is a lot of stress around us at the moment, and stress can cause us to stop doing things that or stop engaging in things that we would normally be doing, because our brains just, they're in survival mode. They're not thinking about pleasure and fun and enjoyment. So making sure that we are still doing things that are enjoyable and fun, and as a way of, I guess, promoting that for ourselves, bringing that into our daily routine and structure, so that we're making it easier for ourselves to maintain that engagement and that connection. So brings us to the third point of connection. So connecting with things, people, activities, places even. As a lot of people talk about using nature as, you know, or finding nature as a great kind of healing connection or place of connection and healing for them, for themselves. So thinking about what we're connecting with, who we're connecting with, what strengths we have in ourselves and how we can use them at a time like this, and those 4 different areas of strengths that we have. Thinking about our values, so what is important to us, what is driving us to be the person that we want to be. And all of these things, doing things that are enjoyable, meaningful, important to us, having routine, having a sense of connectedness or connection, having an awareness of our strengths and our values will all promote resilience in us. So resilience is this big kind of mental health term that has, you know, had a lot of airspace in the last few years, but there are many, many things that contribute towards a sense of resilience. And this is a time when perhaps people aren't feeling very resilient. So sometimes it's useful to remind ourselves that we are actually very resilient beings and that we do all have a lot of skills and strengths and competencies and capacity to be resilient. It's, I guess, where I'm going with this is to break down the kind of sense that resilience is this big unachievable thing that is, you know, you have to do lots of work in practice to achieve and to be resilient. If you're doing all of those things, or you're connecting or have an awareness of all those things, then you are certainly very well on your way to having a very strong sense of resilience. And just to finish off, as per last session, about, you know, if there's anything that's particularly come up for you today, any thoughts or feelings, emotional responses that you've noticed you've had thinking about any of the things that we've discussed, there are the numbers up there on the screen that I would encourage you to reach out to the connections, trusted connections that you have within your social world, within your family, within your friendship groups, within your community. And I think I said this last time at the end of the session, for those that are more inclined towards seeking out resources electronically, that website there at the bottom there, Head to Health, that's an Australian government website which has heaps of resources around what to do and how to navigate, I guess, health and well-being during this COVID time, as I keep referring to it as. So thank you for your time and your attention today, and there will be 2 more sessions after this, so hopefully you might perhaps jump in on one or more of those. And I wish you well and hope you've found something of value and usefulness and insight for you today. Go well, take care, bye.